Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Karina Robinson, co-director of the Inclusion Initiative, along with my colleague, Associate Professor Grace Lorden. This new research centre at the LSE brings together behavioural science and data to create more inclusive corporate cultures. We're currently working on a number of fantastic projects, which range from exploring how artificial intelligence can be used to promote inclusion, to considering how luck versus effort is attributed across groups in the corporate world, to considering solutions to the obstacles facing Black professional women. Do follow us on Twitter at LSE_TII or sign up to our newsletter. Directions on how to do that are being pushed in the chat box. This event will be recorded, and after 40 minutes, I will look for your questions in the chat box and look forward to having our amazing guest, who I'm about to introduce, answer them. Now, this is the 6th of our Open Door, Open City monthly webinars. The name speaks for itself. We aim to open the door to the city and business to all talent and to make sure they're included. That is how you create a culture of innovation, of openness, of productivity. And we are immensely lucky to have with us today Poppy Jaman OBE. I won't go through her whole CV because if you're on this webinar, it's because you've already read it and you want to hear her. I would just say that of all the awards she's won in the field of workplace mental health, all the pioneering work she's done on social and equality matters nationally, internationally, the name that she was given in the FT award she received in 2019 encapsulates her, and that is Game Changer. So, Miss Game Changer, a big welcome to Open Door, Open City.
Thanks, Karina. I'm very, very happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me and including me.
Poppy, to start with, could we put some context, some background to your story? How did you grow up and how did you find your way?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And look, many people have heard me tell my story before. So, and it always surprises me how many people still sort of respond with, wow, like I relate to that, or that resonated with me, or my mum or my sister or my daughter. So I'll tell it. I'll tell it here again today for this event. But I've been working in the mental health world for about 24 years now. And my journey and my introduction to mental health was through my own mental illness, actually. So in my 20s, after the birth of my daughter, I got diagnosed with postnatal depression. But if I look back now, the adverse childhood events that happened in my life, I probably was experiencing mental health struggles in my teenage years. But, you know, I'm mid-40s, and back then it wasn't part of the social narrative that it is now. So I guess I was one of those kids that probably just bypassed systems. And, you know, I was incredibly clever at school, so I was a high performer. So again, just went unnoticed in terms of the fact that I might have been struggling. And also I think the cultural differences that still sort of come into, my teachers were like, well, actually Poppy's just different. She's just from Bangladeshi Muslim culture. So those are things that we can't interfere with. So I think I think that still resonates. And I think that's relevant to the conversation we're going to continue having on this discussion. So early childhood struggles, growing up in this country, migrant family, third generation, low socioeconomic group, a daughter in a culture where at the time being heard and seen was not promoted. In fact, as a girl in my community at that time, it was very much you should not be heard or seen. So then sort of, you know, struggling with this whole, well, I wanted to travel and have a career. And actually that too was not perceived as that should be part of my narrative. Being ambitious as a girl at my, you know, back then from my perspective or my family's perspective was not on the cards either. So I wasn't designed or raised to be a CEO. I was raised to be a great wife and daughter-in-law and a mother. And so anyway, so moving forward into sort of mental health issues and diagnosis, actually, when I experienced my mental health struggles, the reason why I am so passionate about work, career, financial security for women particularly, is that it was a job that got me out of my mental health struggles. And when I was diagnosed, I thought my life was over. And actually that journey of 4 or 5 years actually was really difficult, because I was navigating between trying to access talking therapy, which weren't culturally appropriate at the time, trying to understand what the meds were going to do and how that was going to help, trying to stay connected to family and understand it from a cultural, spiritual perspective on what may be going on in my world. And then there was this sort of actually being poor and not being able to see a future was probably the thing that made me feel like I was losing hope. And if I could deal with that and address that, that would change my life. That was the gut instincts. And I come from a family that are, you know, work ethics is very high on the agenda. That's connected with pride and community, and actually, but not necessarily for women. So a funny combination of things, but there I was, and I got a job, and that was the beginnings of my recovery. And so then fast forward sort of the last 24 years, worked at the Department of Health on race equality and mental health, then led mental health first aid here in England, then led and now continuing to leading the City Mental Health Alliance here in England. So that's the story of stories turning into power.
You say that many people have heard it, and obviously I've known you for a while, and so I've heard it, but it's very powerful every time you tell it. So don't get bored of telling it, okay? Keep on going. But one of the things that is very interesting, what you say, is about work, in part, was the savior. And I've always thought, there is a balance in life. And there are times where your personal life is going well, times it's going badly, work the same. And having both things is very important. And that also ties in with all the work you've done with corporates, because corporates have always been seen in mental health as part of the problem. But you have grouped them together, the City Mental Health Alliance, to be part of the solution. Would you tell me a bit more about the City Mental Health Alliance and what you do there as CEO?
Yeah, so the City Mental Health Alliance, again, an amazing story. So after the financial crisis, what we saw was stress being reported in the city quite openly for the first time. So and the city businesses starting to talk about employee well-being and what does that mean and how do we solve it? But actually there was also that, the stigma is such that no one organization wanted to put their hand up and say, even if they were doing a lot of stuff around mental health and well-being, they didn't want to put their hand up and say, we're doing this, because of the potential reputational harm that would cause at the time. Because you can imagine looking at from on the outside on a highly stigmatized agenda. And if you're saying we're a law firm in the city creating working on mental health for our employees, it could be misconstrued that you've got employees who are really struggling, and the stigma and the shame and all of that. So this was a good sort of 13 years ago now. And so then business leaders got together, who are all still part of the City Mental Health Alliance. So, I just helped out. This community is led by business and supported by experts. So business leaders got together and went, how do we solve this together? And then, random events, but I came into that group and had and the rest is history. So the City Mental Health Alliance, our vision is to create mentally healthy workplaces, and we're doing that around the world. We're in 4 countries: UK, Hong Kong, Australia, Singapore. We've also got US, India, New Zealand, Portugal, all in the pipeline. And we're also developing a sort of our global organization, if you like, now. So we're amazing. And why we're amazing is that big corporations, so Bank of England, BNY Mellon, Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, London Stock Exchange, so anchor organizations like the London Stock Exchange, Bank of England, and the City have lent in and gone, this is the right thing to do. So that's what we're doing. And then on a very practical point, so what does that actually mean? How do you create mentally healthy workplaces? So we're very practical. We're not a campaigning organization. What does your leadership look like? Is this a boardroom agenda? Have you done an assessment to identify where the strengths and weaknesses within your organization's culture is? Is there line manager training? So we're very pragmatic. And the other bit is, when we started, nobody was talking about workplace mental health. In fact, the number of times people said to me, don't call it mental health, call it resilience, call it something else. But now, I think one of the things the City Mental Health Alliance has done with the brands that are working with us and the stories that we tell of their successes is influence all of UK and globally to actually do better in this space. So as you can tell, Karina, I'm so proud of the City Mental Health Alliance.
Not surprising, Poppy. And interestingly, I mean, there are 2 sides to the effect the pandemic has had on the city's mental health, if you will, which is the mental health of the people who work there. On the one hand, it's a positive. I feel companies are much more open to understanding mental health challenges of their employees, because all of a sudden leadership became more empathetic. You were seeing people's backgrounds. You were seeing the little child wandering around and having to be taken care of by the working mother at the same time as she was doing meetings and things. Do you think more of a stigma has been removed on the back of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, even 2 years ago, if you had said to me, calmness, kindness, and compassion were going to be part of the leadership skill set that we are going to be looking for in 18 months' time, I would have laughed. I would have been like, Karina, that's not happening. I've got an MBA. That was not what I was taught. Business schools are all about profit and how you actually increase reputation without thinking about the social impact. I have heard compassion more than I have heard any other word in the last 18 months, and staying calm as a leader, fostering a kindness culture. I mean, those are words that have come out of chief executives, the mouths of chief executives of banks, and that's absolutely the right thing, the right set of skills that we need for the rebuild and the future. And that's one of the things that I don't want to lose. But the other thing that's happened is we've all asked the question, how are you? And sincerely listened. Before the pandemic, the how are you question is essentially the training that we were trying to give managers. Ask that question. It's a workplace. It's relevant to workplace. It's so on some levels, amongst the tragedy of the pandemic and the loss and the grief, the one thing that has happened is this compassionate dialogue at every level in an organization where people have genuinely listened. And again, that's the other thing that I don't want us to lose from this, is how do we continue to ask how are you when it's appropriate and relevant, when you notice signs of change, when we're in transition, because those are all the stresses that we talk about in the workplace, and continue to actually act on those to create and foster a culture of well-being in businesses.
The Samaritans have done a wonderful program under the Lord Mayor's appeal, where through surveys, they realize that many people are slightly intimidated by asking a colleague who's obviously troubled, how are they? Because they don't quite know what their responsibilities will be on the back of it. And they've got a great online program that they've launched in the last year that just helps talk you through, how you can help colleagues. And that's been downloaded and sponsored by the Lord Mayor's Appeal and the corporate sector. So a lot of good things have been coming out recently. But the fact is the pandemic has led to worsening mental health from those who are already experiencing problems and has brought in a whole new cohort. There was a statistic that almost a fifth of the British population has experienced depression during the pandemic, which is double the previous rates. And for women, the numbers are worse.
Yeah.
Now, we're celebrating International Women's Day, and they've had the biggest mental health declines. What can we do about this?
Yeah. So, the health inequalities or the inequalities already exist. So I think the first thing I say to everyone is let's not pretend that this is a pandemic related issues, and particularly for women. The numbers speak for themselves, and we don't need to go into the data around that. But actually, the pandemic has further exacerbated those inequalities. And so what we're seeing is more women leave the workplace because of caring responsibilities. No matter what we say, majority of the caring responsibilities, whether it's parents or children, still sit on the shoulders of women. The right data isn't being collected at systems level, nationally, at government level, around how many people are, around the gender specificities of people applying for universal credit, for example. And so there isn't enough data that systems change data that is being collected so that we can actually create policies that try to diminish these inequalities. But what I would say is for me personally, when I look at those big challenges, Karina, I look at it and think, God, this is so big. Like I can sometimes feel immobilized. Do you know what I mean from that? Yeah,
absolutely,
completely. And so I come back to, okay, so what is within my sphere of influence and what can I do? And let's start there and then we'll build out. And actually, one of the things that I've done is to very publicly, I put it up on my LinkedIn, leadership commitments for gender and race equality. So we know that visibility matters. So whether it's platforms like this, or whether it's conferences, whether it's putting someone forward for that key meeting. So one of the commitments that I've made as a woman that's with the honor and the privilege of having a leadership title is to bring other women on. And when I join a conference or an event, which I get invited to do all the time, I now ask for their D&I index. I ask for whether the panel is going to be at least 50% women or gender diverse. I ask whether there's going to be, where did they go to seek out the speakers, and not just the side shows, the main event, the main stage. What does that look like? So that's one commitment, which is asking the right questions when I'm engaging on work, because I can. And I can tell you in the last 3 months, I've had 4 events go and include women as a result of those questioning. So it works because people sometimes haven't thought about it. It's not always malicious. It's just people haven't thought about it. And when you say, I'm not going to participate if you don't answer these questions in a polite way, people have to. The other thing is about sponsoring women. We talk a lot about mentoring and talent pool development, etc. But I feel like I have a responsibility to sponsor other women's careers, and I'm unashamedly going to do that for other Black and brown women for obvious reasons. But and I guess I think we just need to be open about that. I think, when we talk about for me, the difference between mentoring and sponsoring is me picking up the phone and saying to someone, this woman is doing some amazing work. I see you've got a job going, and actually I'd really thoroughly recommend that you speak to them. I think it's that kind of proactivity that's required, where we are getting behind our colleagues and the future leaders' careers. And then the third thing that I have said to myself is, you know, I am very lucky that I get to sit in rooms with CEOs. So since the pandemic, for example, the mental health sector CEOs, 16 of us, you know, it's an enormous list, but 16 of us have been meeting pretty much every fortnight for an hour to just understand what the landscape looks like and what we as organizations can do and what we can collectively do. But when I sit in that room, I am the only person of visible ethnically diverse. So so I pose the question to my colleagues is who isn't in this room? And it's not about including everybody in the room. It's how do we make sure that we haven't got a blind spot, and how. So I think it's so who's not in the room and whose agenda needs to be on the room. I will ask that consistently. Sponsoring women's careers and asking about D&I indexes and inclusion and everything that I participate in. That's my job as a leader, because I think it's an enormous privilege to be able to remove barriers that you yourself did not experience. And that, I think, is what all leaders should be doing. I haven't experienced some of those inequalities for a long time. But I have some, and there'll be many more that I will never experience. And actually, that's our job. So that's what we can all do.
I think it's a very, very good point about the sponsoring. It's about, I mean, sometimes people have blind spots when they organize events, but other times they're actually very concerned. They don't know who to bring on, who's different. And as soon as you suggest these three people are wonderful, bring them on, they can do it. Yeah. But if you're not going to stand up and say that, those three people who you know are excellent and don't look like everybody else are not going to be in the room at all. One of the other, I mean, I think this sort of was what was so interesting about some of your work lately, which is bringing everything together, bringing mental health, bringing ethnicity, bringing inclusion. But I do sometimes wonder, Poppy, whether you ever get tired of being a social activist. I mean, you're married to a social activist. You are held on a bit of a platform there as a sort of example, and it's exhausting.
I think so. I just wrote down as we were sitting, as you were saying this, and it's a perfect quote actually. So you need to know when to get out of your own way and other people's way. And I was thinking about it within the context of the previous sort of women supporting women, empowering and bringing other people up, and making that decision out of curiosity rather than judgment. And I don't get this right, because sometimes I hear stuff and my blood boils and I want to be so reactionary to that. But I am learning to adopt a compassionate dialogue approach, which is, let's ask the question, what, out of curiosity, what made you say that? And what do you think of that? So, and then that sort of leads to, well, actually, sometimes I'm the block and I need to get out of my own way. And I mean that for myself as well. I've just had 2 days off since since Christmas. I am exhausted at the moment, like really tired. But I'm also really fueled by working with amazing people on amazing projects, because I've never really been able to separate out sort of my work and my life. My life is my work. And I feel very honored that I do work that gives me so much fulfillment, but it is the emotional labor that comes with that. And most women will be able to relate to that. The emotional labor that comes with turning up, showing up, putting on a face, dealing with whatever the cultural context is. And then if you're a brown woman on top of that, there's additional stuff. And then there's the blended family and, your own stuff, and because the activism doesn't ever stop. You're doing it at work, but then I'm also challenging family around racism. If we look at the Bangladeshi community, we run restaurants up and down the country. That's what we're known for. But how many Black people do we employ? Did you know? So that interracial stuff really bothers me, like colorism really bothers me. So honestly, Karina, the job is never done. But I do a lot of yoga. I go for extremely long walks without any gadgets. I have a sari collection that's 35 years old and to die for, and it is just amazing. So I'll put on a sari that makes me feel great. And I have lots of things that I do that, you know, spending time with my daughters. So I do try and top myself up as regularly as possible.
That is wonderful and very helpful, I'm sure, for a lot of people out there, because we all need to find ways of, as you say, topping yourself up with energy. Now, getting back to the corporate workplace, in one of your posts, you wrote about recognizing, and I quote, that discrimination had led me to contorting myself into shapes that enabled me to fit into the space allowed for me. I had grown to adapt like a chameleon and change color to suit my surroundings. And in so doing, I had lost my identity. End of quote. When you become part of an organization, it doesn't matter whether it's a government organization, it's a private company, you have to make some adjustments. You have to make some compromises. And at what point are those compromises a betrayal of self? How can you deal with that fine balance?
Yeah, years of therapy and coaching is the short answer. So, and again, this is something that I say to everyone really, and again, particularly women. Invest in yourself. And my investment in myself, beyond the topping up that I talked about, that's fun, is coaching and therapy. And therapy initially because I had mental health issues and complex trauma to be dealing with, and I had no idea about what that was about. So when I started unpacking the layers that I spoke to my story earlier, I was able to go, oh, okay, so this judgment in my world, or this guidance as a young girl, led to me adapting in this way, which meant that actually I just adapted to fit into what my parents wanted, but that's not sustainable. And I was incredibly rebellious as a teenager as a result, because I wasn't able to sustain fitting myself into this box. But you can sort of kick back against your parents. But when you then go into the wider world and people go, oh, right, yeah, I remember someone saying to me, do you know what, well, this was when I was running mental health first aid and I was in Hong Kong. I was still running mental health first aid, and I was doing a piece of work in Hong Kong, and a colleague who had met me, who was a CEO of another organization, said, do you know what you should be doing? You should be doing a lot more diversity work into schools, because that is what you should be doing. And I just thought, that's really interesting. I only lead mental health first aid. England's growing, and I mean, it was at the time the fastest growing, in the top 10 fastest growing SMEs in the UK and in the top 500 for Europe. And yet what you see when you see me is I should be doing diversity work. Isn't my presence testimony to diversity and inclusion and what happens when we see people and open doors? But it was just so interesting, the boxes that people want to put you in. I sat on the board of Public Health England for 2 terms, and quite often I asked myself, am I here because it's just a token gesture so that actually boards can say that this is, we've got a brown woman who's quite young on our board? And then I step back and think, well, actually, no, because what a friend of mine said to me, it doesn't matter why you're on that board. Once you're on that board, you create the change that you want to create. And actually, the Every Mind Matters platform that the UK is so proud of now, and thank goodness we've had it during the lockdown, was one of the ideas that came out of that board that I put on the table and presented to Theresa May, our then Prime Minister. And actually, I'm so proud of that piece of work. And when I get my NHS letters for the pandemic, because I'm in the higher risk group, and I see one of the resources is Every Mind Matters, it literally, I just go, that was me. I played a tiny little part in making that happen, and thank goodness I did. So I'm very aware about the boxes that people want to put me in. And then on a daily basis as well, Karina, like I've again spoken to people about this, which is I've turned events that I'm going to be the keynote speaker to, and people have handed me their coat to hang up or asked if I was catering. So and you know, my family business, restaurant business, I'd love to be in catering, but I haven't got the skills to. But it's the assumptions that people make about the roles. Can this little brown woman be a CEO? That doesn't register.
And that's partly what a lot of young people are facing when they go into the workforce. And do you react badly? Do you react with humor? Because the initial thing when somebody treats you badly is to be angry. And is that the right reaction?
I think the right reaction is whatever you're feeling, because actually we feel what we feel. And quite often the piece of the quote, that's part of the quote that says about contorting myself and losing my identity, is suppressed anger, is suppressed emotional reaction in the moment. So actually being, when someone said, oh, are you catering? The feeling was, I'm furious because actually I've had another 10 things today and I'm here, and now I'm catering. Can you? But the response was a big smile and, no, I'm not I'm your keynote speaker this evening. That was the response. And I guess I'm at an age where I can jot this stuff down, and I'm also got the support mechanisms of coaching. So the coaching session that came after, every 3 months, the coaching session that arrives, there's a log of things that I need to go and address. And usually that is about knowing that I felt something and I reacted in the way that I did. And sometimes those reactions are appropriate. Other times they leave me a little bit damaged. It's another little scar that just goes down. And all I need to do is name them to soothe them. So
that it brings me back to, we were talking earlier about compassion being mentioned. And one of the things about compassion is compassion for those who you cannot really talk to. Compassion for those who you don't know what their background is, you don't know what has formed them. It's a very difficult one, and I can't say I can apply it all the time, but that's the way I always try and deal with prejudice, is to try and be compassionate and try and see that that person perhaps didn't mean it. Difficult, but it's as you say, there are different ways of reacting, and it depends on the situation. But one of the things that we have been looking at is the levelling up agenda. This government has makes a lot of noise about. And perhaps that sounds so unobjective, that sounds so subjective. I think the government is trying to do its best. But the truth of the matter is, developed economies have been suffering from rising levels of inequality for a number of years. Additionally, if you are multi-ethnic with the pandemic, the chances are you have suffered more. We still don't quite know genetically why, but the doctors are looking at it. But also, if you have high levels of deprivation, if you have other medical issues, you live cheek by jowl with family members. So ethnicity is a big part of this. And yet, to me, the government's levelling up agenda, there's no mention of it. It's all about, this seat here where we have an MP who just, managed to wrest it from Labour, and this other one. And I'm desperately trying not to be political here, but, there's no way one can avoid it. Ethnicity, is it a word to be avoided by this government?
So, first of all, I just want to respond to the previous comment, when you said about as women, when we deal with stuff, it's the reaction that we have that we need to think about, and the impact that has on us. And I lead with this question, which is in my head, I ask myself, what happened to you, rather than what's wrong with you. So when someone's when someone's pushed a button, I try and go, instead of going, what is wrong with you, is go, what happened to you? And then that puts me, so I just put that out there as a piece of
wisdom.
Insight. Yeah, if my colleagues and friends want to pick that up. But look, how can we have a society where everybody from every aspect, business leaders, social justice leaders, data scientists, medics, are all going, there is a socio-economic element to this. Social mobility probably plays a big part in this. And if we look at the bottom rungs of where the social mobility has a impact, or poverty essentially, who are those people? Well, most of those people that are earning under 30k in this country are from Black and brown communities, but those are the people that are also in the key worker roles that kept the country going during pandemic. So therefore they are most exposed. Those are the people that often live in multi-generational household where social distancing is impossible. So the social distancing policy that was put out, which is go to your primary residence, I grew up in a family with 13 people in the same house. So primary residence was this 3-bedroom house in Portsmouth where we were all going to be mixing. We have a lot of family that work in the health sector. So I don't know what the science is going to come up with in terms of vulnerability for the pandemic, but what I do know is that ethnicity is a crucial discussion to be having within the context of poverty and social mobility. And actually, I'm very lucky, middle-class woman, live in Lewis, nice big house, nice garden, downs behind. I could do all the things that was told that I needed to do to keep myself safe. Do most of my family have that privilege? No, they don't. We've experienced in my extended family something like 8 deaths relating to COVID. I speak to my white counterparts, my friends, and they've not had that. And I know that's just 2 conversations, but when I look at the difference in the setup of our families, it matters. So yeah, my short answer is we need to look at all the information we have to do the right job and not make it political. And part of the reason I think that ethnicity and race is being left out is the obvious, is we haven't got participation at government level in the right places. The right people aren't being heard. And actually, to do this work properly, the government would have to change the way that they are including people. Going back to my principles, who's not in the room to get this right? And so it is a bit of this race has always been a political football, and it is here again, and it's not being used to do the right thing. I think it's being used to go, we're a bit freaked out, let's not deal with that in this very open way. What an opportunity missed. What an opportunity missed.
Hopefully something will change. I don't know what, and I don't know what sort of activism is necessary, but you and I are working on a little something, which will add its grain of sand to this. And the hidden workforce, the people who were out there helping the economy continue, who actually had to be out physically. So the security guards, and we talk about the city because that's where I think the city has great leadership through its companies that can then spread out. But security guards, catering staff, drivers, people who are not seen. And I very much like you, as our last question before we take questions from the audience, tell us a bit about the hidden workforce and this campaign.
Yeah, I mean, so we reflecting on the impact of the pandemic in the early days. So this was sort of summer last year, and I seeing the emerging data, I was really disturbed because actually at the time we didn't know what the death rates were going to be, and all of this data coming out, and I just thought, oh my goodness, well that's my cousin at risk, that's my sister-in-law at risk, that's my, because they were all key workers. And I thought, wow. So started to have this conversation within the City Mental Health Alliance leadership team. And in fact, there was 40 chief executives of banks on this one of these calls. And we had this conversation around the hidden workforce, you know. So, and then we were like, well, are they hidden, or are they people that we don't actually see? And then we were all able to go, well, it's really interesting, isn't it? So when we walk into a big corporate building in the city, how often do we thank the guy that's just opened the door? Or how often do we look up when somebody's brought in a cup of tea in a meeting and actually acknowledge that person? And in fact, what would it like? That's a responsibility that we need to all take individually, but as organizations in the city, we've got all of these well-being initiatives for our employees, but often the catering, you know, the people that are doing the routine manual work that turn up and used to open the offices before the employees came in and leave after the employees have gone home. These people just do this work like in stealth mode. and so, but these are also the people that are the key workers of the city. These are also the people that are under the 30K threshold, often, you know, a lot lower than that. So what can we do in the city to move that forward? So that conversation has led me to you first, and then we've got the City of London Mayor's Initiative involved, and we've got the City of London Corporation, we've got Legal and General, we've got the Bank of England, and a number of other organizations that have come together and gone, let's actually, and the GLA, importantly, talking about this. And we are going to be, I mean, really early days, but See Me is the campaign that we want to launch in the city. And it's going to be brilliant, because what we're doing is we're celebrating the diversity that we have in the city that keeps the city going, and actually workplaces that are in the city going, let's look at all of our workplaces, not just the categorization we have on how we're contracting with people. So watch this space on See Me. It's going to be fun.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be huge.
Yeah.
Now let me turn to a few questions from Grace Lorden, who is the associate professor at the LSE who founded the initiative. She would like to know your perspective on narrative. Do we need to change the narrative around inclusion and diversity to capture the minds of younger generations? Because she's meeting so many women who say they didn't see the glass ceiling or how they're being held back until they were in their 40s or 50s.
Yeah. And yeah, Grace, that's such a common story. And I think there's a I call it the say-do gap. Yeah. So when we, particularly in Western society, so in the UK, sort of, we're raising children in schools where equality is being at least spoken about. And so there's almost this sort of false sense of security that our young women are being raised in, which is the world is an equal place. And of course, they struggle and they're doing more than they should. They're doing more than their male counterparts to achieve the same kind of successes. All the data prove this. But what we've not, I think one of the things that's happened is the gap is we're not equipping young women, schools, university to really think about the inequalities that they may or may not experience. And actually, if they haven't experienced it, it's that bit that I said earlier, it is a real privilege to remove the barriers that you yourself aren't experiencing. But what if you don't know that that the barriers are there because you've got a blind spot? And I think it's really important to create dialogue in that space. So you're absolutely right. I think in order to stop the inequalities resetting itself, which we're in huge danger of at the moment, we need to go back to the beginning, or well, not back to go forward and start again. on increasing the awareness of our young people of all genders on what this means and how they can start with themselves. So actually, how do you protect your health and well-being in these scenarios? But how do you work with each other to make sure that there's solidarity in the approach that we're going forward with? I think, does that answer the question, Karina? Have
I think for Grace, it will, absolutely. Now, another question from Farah Chowdhury. Poppy, thank you for sharing some of your story with us. How do you combat imposter syndrome when you found yourself, and she uses your quote here, contorting to workplace expectations and the boxes you've been put into as a brown woman, while also holding cultural and familial expectations? So how do you combat imposter syndrome?
Yeah, again, Farah, I would say get coaching on this stuff. Like, it is a really good investment in yourself. So I have a really simple tool. I call it my Gremlin. I taught it to my girls when they were 5, 6, 7 years old. We used to draw their Gremlin and they'd give it a character, and it was, and so when I sense that I am contorting myself, and we all feel it because it doesn't feel healthy, it feels exhausting, there isn't flow, you're irritated by the project that you're on, all of those things are your warning signs. So first of all, get to know you. And how do you know when you're contorting yourself? Because it's sort of, they're just words, aren't they? So how do you know? And for me, I know because there's a sense and there's a gut feeling, and I'm more tired and the work feels like really hard work. And so when I feel that, I ask myself, is it the Gremlin on the shoulder? So is it the voices of people and society that is asking me, that I'm trying to respond to, or is it something that my heart wants to do? And sometimes it's both. But actually, when I recognize whether it's the imposter, which is usually made up of people that have judged you or society's judgments voice, then I'm able to respond in a way that is no longer contorting myself, and it's more about fitting in, because I can then go, okay, this is the voice of the imposter syndrome, the trying to fit in, the voice of society's expectation, my mother's voice, my father's voice, my first boss's voice, whatever it is for you, and go, okay, I'm now going to respond appropriately to that. But it's about putting myself back into control of that situation, that I'm not just reacting, which is often the case, that we're just reacting, and a little pause helps. So I hope that's create your Gremlin, draw it, put it up on the fridge, teach your kids it, and learn to recognize what is genuinely a complex issue for you, and what is your Gremlin, what is the imposter.
I have a question here about a book. Why haven't you written a book, and when are you going to write a book?
This has come up a few times. So I don't know, like I don't know, maybe in the future is where I'll put that. I think I need someone to work with me on a book project, because I haven't got the patience to write. I think that, so not yet. So I think maybe that will come in the future. But also, like, what am I going to write about is where I'm at with this. Like, do I write a business book which is about how to create great organizations that are purpose-led, do good in the world, look after the planet? Or do I write one about being a woman and forced marriage and depression? Like, I don't know where to start.
What about how to create change? You are a game changer, and that fits with everything else. But also, by the way, Poppy, just between us here, can I just say you've written such great columns and blogs and things that a lot of that just can be brought into it. But given that this is the London School of Economics, I'm sure we have people who would be happy to work with you on it. And if on the back of this, you get this ghost writer, organizer, and producer, You owe us all, okay? You owe us.
I'm up. I absolutely owe you, and I'm up for that. I'm up for that conversation. Thanks, Karina.
Will you talk to us about Rebalance, which is a new venture you've launched, as though you don't have enough on?
Yeah. So look, one of the reasons that I realized that I keep creating the organization I want to work for, and going back to that glass ceilings, I decided when I was, my last employee job, I suppose. Of course, I'm employed by my respective organizations, but I founded them. So I founded Mental Health First Aid. I founded City Mental Health Alliance. I'm founding Rebalance. And if you look at my career, there's a cycle. It's sort of 10 years. And then about 7 years into the first one, I start building something else. And then City Mental Health Alliance appears. And then I'm doing that. And we're now sort of 10 years into CMHA. And now I'm building Rebalance. So I think there's definitely a pattern that we have in the way that a cycle of our careers. But one of the reasons that I ended up leading and running my own organizations was I was convinced that if I remained an employee at a civil servant, I was always going to be put in the DNI or the mental health box. So talking about contorting yourself, because I'm not a medic. I haven't got all of, the qualifications that were necessary because I had a forced marriage when I was 17. So, I went back and got an MBA and what have you. But I guess so for me, my choice to be a leader and create change was to create organizations who have, touch wood, been very successful because of the teams that they and what the talent that they attract. So Rebalance is my new venture. We launched it this year. We're working towards, we aspire to be a B Corp. And I'm learning a lot about what does it mean to be a B Corp. So a B Corp is a business that is ethical on every level, your entire supply chain, and I'm so excited about that because I'm learning a new way to do business, which is great for my mental health because it keeps me stretching. But our vision is to diminish inequalities by working with global communities, Karina. So we'll do, one project that we were doing was with 17 construction companies looking at mental health and suicide reduction on site. And then another project that I'm doing is called Kihobor. So if there's anybody that's from Bengali community here, will recognize that as a very friendly way of going, what news or what's up? It's like the equivalent of that. And that project is a volunteer project. It's run entirely by volunteers. I'm investing in it. And the idea is that we're going to tell, this year is Bangladesh's 50th anniversary, its 50th birthday. So we're going to tell at least 50 British Bengali stories of what it means to be a Bengali person in this country, but also for projecting into the future, like what are the blind spots that we've got as a community? We don't talk about LGBTQ people, we don't talk about all sorts of stuff. So actually unashamedly celebrating our culture. So Rebalance is my next venture and probably the vehicle that allows me to do lots of fun things that I want to do.
Such a big part of what you do, I feel, is about celebrating.
Yeah.
Because DNI, mental health, these are seen as, I'm not going to say negative, but these are seen as sort of heavy. It's very difficult I can't quite find the word to express it, but there's no fun in them.
Yeah.
And actually finding the fun in things is a great way to bring in more people and appeal more. How does this fit with your ethos?
Well, I guess that's why Rebalance is called Rebalance. It's like, well, actually, let's take something that is, layered with stigma and injustice and trouble, and actually let's just look at that completely differently and put it into a celebratory spin. So, and it's not a spin, it's authentic, because actually when you come from feeling suicidal, which I tried to end my life twice in my 20s. Thank God I didn't, because I'm really, really happy to be alive. Didn't succeed, but that's what's not to celebrate about that? What's not to celebrate about the adversities that create the power that we have got as women and the changes that we go on to make? And actually, that's not about being CEOs. It's just about being great people. It's just about being good people that we're, and valuing self-worth and value. So I everything that I want to do are about hard subjects that people don't want to touch because it's almost the untouchable subjects, and put it out there as celebration. And for me, that's the rebalancing.
Thank you, Poppy. We're running out of time, but can I just thank you for celebrating being with us? The narratives and a positive outlook, that must be part of being a game changer. And one definitely sees it in you. And in fact, dare I say it, your voice, maybe it's an audio book you need to come up with. There's something great about your voice. Now, enough, I won't give you any more compliments, but I will say a huge thank you for fitting us into your mega busy diary and for giving such great advice and such instruction on how to be a game changer. Do tune in, for all of you listening, to our next Open Door, Open City webinar with Shelley Archambault, the Black female Silicon Valley entrepreneur. And Black female Silicon Valley doesn't always go together, does it? But it definitely should more. She's going to talk to us about culture, being unashamedly ambitious, which is the name of her recent book. And again, that definitely doesn't go with being a woman. Are we allowed to use the word ambitious? Yes, we are now. Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Now, from all of us here at the Inclusion Initiative, and thank you, Poppy, again, and goodbye, everybody.
Thank you so much.